2:15 in the afternoon, the Strait of Hormuz, the USS Abraham Lincoln, cut through the heavy, salt-laden air of the Gulf at 20 knots. This was supposed to be a routine transit into the Arabian Sea. It was not. For the last 20 minutes, the primary search radar of the ship had been locked onto a phenomenon that the system struggled to categorize. 48 distinct signatures were approaching from the north. They were small, they were fast, they were moving with a synchronized precision that looked less like a flight of aircraft and more like a single, shattering pane of glass. Inside the Combat Information Center, the air was cool and smelled of ozone and recycled oxygen. The Combat Information Center, or CIC, was the tactical heart of the carrier. Rear Admiral Marcus Thorne stood behind the radar consoles. He watched the glowing icons. They were not weaving, they were not searching, they were closing the distance with a terrifying, linear intent. The question that hung over the dim room was simple. No one knew who had authorized these contacts to get this close. The heat of the afternoon sun beat down on the flight deck. A pair of F-18 Super Hornets sat on the waste catapults. Their engines were idling in a low, rhythmic growl. The pilots were already strapped in. They were waiting for a command that had not yet come. Below the waterline, the hull of the carrier vibrated with the power of its nuclear reactors. Everything was ready for war. No one wanted to start it. 2:32 in the afternoon. The contacts were now 12 nautical miles out. The tactical action officer spoke into his headset. His voice was flat. Professional. Bridge. Combat. Target group is now at 12 miles. Bearing 0, 4, 5. Speed is 80 knots. Bearing 045. Speed is 80 knots. They are maintaining a staggered wedge formation. Admiral Thorne stepped closer to the main display. 80 knots was slow for a missile, but incredibly fast for a standard loitering munition. These were something else. They were flying at just 50 feet above the water. They were hiding in the sea clutter, yet their signatures remained perfectly stable. There was no wobbling. There were no corrected flight paths. The Admiral spoke. Identify the lead drone. The technician shook his head. Sir, there is no lead. They are all communicating. It is a mesh network. If we jam one, the others will compensate. It is like trying to punch a cloud. The Admiral looked at the screen. The drones were not spreading out to find targets. They were beginning to curve. They were carving a wide, sweeping arc across the water. They were not aiming for the carrier. They were aiming for the space around it. 2:45 in the afternoon. The first drone reached the 1,000-meter mark off the port bow. It did not cross the line. It flared its nose upward. It shed its forward momentum and hovered. A second drone took a position exactly 30 meters to its left. Then a third drone followed. On the bridge, Captain Sarah Vance raised her binoculars. She could see them now. They were small, dark shapes against the shimmering horizon. They looked like jagged black crosses. Each one carried a stabilized camera gimbal under its chin. Two small, white tubes were mounted under its wings. They were armed. The captain spoke. Report, the sensor operator replied. Ma'am, they are holding position. 1,000 meters exactly. All 48 contacts. They are forming a circle. The Admiral entered the bridge. He looked out at the line of silent, hovering machines. They surrounded the massive carrier in a perfect, geometric ring. They were close enough to see, but far enough to make an engagement legally ambiguous. It was a standoff of mathematical perfection. The afternoon was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 2:50 in the afternoon. The Strait of Hormuz. The ring was static. From the bridge of the USS Abraham Lincoln, the drones looked like black specks pinned against the blue of the horizon. They did not bob in the wind. They did not drift with the carrier as it moved. They maintained their relative position to the ship with a precision that was unnatural. If the carrier turned 5 degrees to starboard, the 48 drones turned in unison. It was as if the ship was the center of a giant, invisible wheel. Inside the Combat Information Center, the electronic warfare officer stared at his monitor. Admiral, I am picking up a low probability of intercept signal. It is a burst transmission. They are not talking to a base. They are talking to each other. Admiral Thorne leaned over the console. Is it a command link? The officer shook his head. Negative. It is a consensus protocol. They are voting on their positions. Every 10 milliseconds, they re-verify the distance between themselves and our hull. They are holding at exactly 1,000 meters. Not 1,001. Not 999. Exactly 1,000. The precision was the anomaly. Standard drones required a human pilot or a global positioning system waypoint. These machines were using the carrier itself as their reference point. They were tethered to the American ship by mathematics. 300 miles away, inside a reinforced concrete bunker, near Bandar Abbas, the air was warmer. The hum of server racks filled the room. Commander Reza Abbas watched a massive wall-mounted screen. On the screen, a digital map of the strait showed a blue icon representing the American carrier. Surrounding it was a perfect, glowing green circle of 48 dots. A technician spoke. "Commander, the swarm has achieved lock. The American vessel is attempting to jam the secondary frequencies. The swarm has already switched to the tertiary band." Commander Abbas nodded slowly. He did not look like a man at war. He looked like a scientist watching a successful experiment. Does the American admiral understand what he is seeing? The technician adjusted a dial. They have gone to general quarters. Their weapons are active, but they have not fired. They will not fire yet, Abbas said. They are looking for a reason. They are looking for a threat. But a circle is not a threat. A circle is a statement. Back on the Lincoln, the tension was a physical weight. Every sailor on the flight deck could see the drones. The F-18 pilots kept their hands near the throttles. The silence on the radio was the loudest thing in the world. 3:10 in the afternoon. A new signal broke the silence. It did not come from the Iranian mainland. It came from the drones themselves. Every radio on the bridge and every speaker in the Combat Information Center crackled to life at once. It was not a voice. It was a rhythmic, pulsing sound, like a heartbeat. Captain Vance looked at the admiral. "Sir, they are broadcasting on our primary distress frequency." The admiral listened. The pulse was steady. 1 beat per second. Then, the pulse changed. It became faster. The black crosses in the sky began to tilt their wings. They were no longer just holding position. They were starting to vibrate. The tactical action officer shouted, "Bridge! Target group is moving. They are closing the gap." The black ring began to shrink. 3:15 in the afternoon. The Persian Gulf. The ring was no longer a flat circle. It was becoming a sphere. The 48 drones did not just move forward. They began to gain altitude and dive simultaneously. They were weaving a cage of carbon fiber and high-grade electronics around the 100,000-ton carrier. The drones were now visible to the naked eye from every gallery and catwalk on the ship. They looked like jagged black insects hovering in a heat haze. Inside the Combat Information Center, the tactical action officer called out the distances with mechanical regularity. Target group at 800 meters, 750, 700. They are accelerating their rotation. On the main tactical screen, the icons were spinning in a dizzying whirlpool. They looked like a swarm of angry bees trapped in a glass jar. But these were not biological entities. They were precision machines. Every movement was calculated to the millimeter. Admiral Thorne kept his voice low and steady. "Bridge, this is the Admiral. What is the status of our escort destroyers?" Captain Vance replied immediately from the bridge. The USS Halsey and the USS Sampson are being shadowed as well. They each have a subswarm of 12 drones surrounding them. We are effectively isolated from our screen. Every ship in the strike group is currently encased in its own ring. 3:24 in the afternoon. Deep beneath the jagged mountains near Bandar Abbas, the Iranian operators did not use joysticks. There were no pilots for the Shahed-X units. The drones operated on a decentralized logic system known as consensus navigation. They were not being led. They were a single, distributed mind. Commander Abbas watched the telemetry on a glowing glass table. The Americans are cycling their fire control radars. They are painting every target in the sky with high-energy pulses. A lead scientist in a white lab coat leaned forward. It does not matter, Commander. The swarm is processing the radar pulses. They are using the American signals to calibrate their own positions. The more the Americans watch them, the more accurate the drones become. We are using their own defensive systems to tighten the net. Abbas looked at the digital clock on the wall. The protocol is at Phase 2. The swarm has established the perimeter. Now, we test their restraint. Initiate the proximity pulse. The scientist tapped a single key. He did not send a command to move. He sent a command to feel. 3:30 in the afternoon. Back on the Abraham Lincoln, the heartbeat sound that had been pulsing through the radio speakers suddenly stopped. The silence lasted for exactly 3 seconds. It was a vacuum of sound that made the officers on the bridge hold their breath. Then, a new sound replaced it. It was a high-pitched, harmonic whine. It was the sound of 48 electric motors redlining at the same time. The vibration was so intense that it began to rattle the thick windows of the bridge. It felt as if the air itself was being shredded by the spinning rotors of the drones. The tactical officer in the Combat Information Center shouted, "Break! Break! One contact is diving. Port side. Rapid descent. Speed is 120 knots. The drone was no longer holding the line. It had broken the mathematical perfection of the ring. It was coming straight for the bridge of the carrier like a kinetic slug. Close-in weapon system to auto, Captain Vance commanded. Target the intruder. The radar-controlled Gatling gun on the port side of the ship began to swivel. Its barrel tracked the diving Black Cross. The system was designed to shred incoming missiles. A drone at this range was an easy target, but firing would mean the end of the standoff. It would mean the beginning of a war. The drone was 500 meters away. 400. The whine was deafening. The Admiral stared through the window at the approaching dot. "Steady," he whispered. "Do not be the first to blink." 3:36 in the afternoon. The Strait of Hormuz. The diving drone leveled off at 300 meters. It did not strike. It did not explode. It simply stopped its descent and hovered directly in front of the primary bridge windows of the USS Abraham Lincoln. It was a dare. The Black Cross was close enough that the individual sensors on its gimbal were visible to the crew. It was looking at them. Inside the bridge, Captain Vance gripped the railing of the command chair. "Admiral, we have a clear firing solution. If I authorize the close-in weapon system to fire, that drone is scrap metal in 2 seconds. The rules of engagement are clear. It has penetrated the inner defensive layer." Admiral Thorne did not look away from the hovering machine. "If we kill one, 47 more will saturate our decks from every angle. This is a trap, Captain. They are waiting for us to pull the trigger. They want the world to see the United States fire the first shot against a single, unarmed reconnaissance unit." The captain looked at the tactical display. The other 47 drones remained in their perfect, shrinking ring. They were waiting for a signal. They were a hair trigger on a global scale. 3:42 in the afternoon. The communications officer signaled from his station. "Sir, I have the Iranian frigate Alborz on the bridge-to-bridge radio. They are 5 miles to our north. They are matching our speed." The admiral took the handset. His voice was firm, professional. "This is Admiral Thorne of the United States Navy. To the captain of the Alborz. Your unmanned aircraft are violating a 1,000-meter safety zone around a sovereign vessel in international waters. One unit has approached within 300 meters. Recall your aircraft immediately, or we will be forced to defend ourselves." There was a long pause. Static filled the line. It was the sound of a contested electromagnetic environment. Then, a voice replied in accented English. "Admiral, this is the captain of the Alborz. We are observing the flight path of the Shahed-X units. We cannot comply with your request. These units are operating on a closed-loop autonomous protocol. There is no manual override. They are programmed to maintain the perimeter until their mission parameters are satisfied. We have no control over the swarm." 3:48 in the afternoon. The admiral lowered the handset. He looked at Captain Vance. "He says they cannot stop it. Either he is lying to provide his government with plausible deniability, or they have truly lost the leash on their own weapon." The captain shook her head. "If it is truly autonomous, then we are not negotiating with a person. We are negotiating with an algorithm, and an algorithm does not care about de-escalation. Inside the Combat Information Center, the electronic warfare officer shouted, "Admiral, the ring is shifting again. They are changing their frequency. They are no longer just monitoring us. They are beginning to pulse their onboard targeting lasers." A targeting laser was the final step before a weapon launch. Across the hull of the carrier, 48 red dots began to dance over the flight deck, the bridge, and the weapons elevators. The drones were painting the targets. 3:50 in the afternoon. The admiral stepped back from the window. "General quarters. Arm all point defense systems. If one of those drones moves another 10 meters closer, we take the entire swarm down." The alarm for general quarters began to wail through the decks of the Lincoln. Thousands of sailors moved to their battle stations. The tension had reached the breaking point. The American carrier was a fortress, but it was a fortress trapped in a cage of light. The electronic warfare officer leaned into his screen. "Sir, I am seeing a massive spike in energy from the center of the swarm. They are not just painting us, they are preparing to broadcast something." 3:55 in the afternoon. The Strait of Hormuz. The USS Abraham Lincoln was now a fortress of high-energy radiation. Every electronic warfare suite on the carrier was active. The ship was screaming into the electromagnetic spectrum. The goal was to sever the invisible threads of the mesh network holding the drones together. If the drones could not talk to each other, the consensus navigation would fail. The circle would break. Inside the Combat Information Center, the electronic warfare officer adjusted his settings. His hands moved quickly over the glowing interface. "Admiral, we are initiating a wideband directional jam. We are flooding the 2.4 and 5.8 GHz ranges. Power is at maximum." Admiral Thorne watched the main tactical display. "Do it. Let us see if they can think through the noise." The air around the carrier's massive antennas seemed to shimmer with invisible power. On the bridge, the radio static became a physical wall of sound. Every unshielded screen on the ship flickered with rhythmic interference. The American crew held their breath. They expected the black crosses to wobble. They expected them to lose their formation and tumble into the sea. 4:05 in the afternoon. The drones did not fall. They did not even flinch. Instead of breaking formation, the 48 units executed a move that defied conventional aerodynamics. They tilted their nose cameras in perfect unison toward the bridge of the carrier. It was a mechanical nod. The electronic warfare officer stared at his screen in disbelief. "Sir, they are not dropping. They have shifted to an optical mesh. They are using their cameras to navigate off each other. My jamming is hitting empty air. They do not need radio anymore." The technology was far beyond what naval intelligence had predicted for an Iranian swarm. This was not a simple remote-controlled weapon. It was a hardened, autonomous entity. It was learning from the American countermeasures in real time. 4:08 in the afternoon. The admiral stepped onto the port bridge wing. He was now less than 300 meters from the closest drone. The high-pitched whine of its electric motors vibrated in his chest. He could see the individual carbon fiber weaves on its fuselage. The drone adjusted its position slightly to compensate for the wind. It was graceful. It was terrifying. Captain Vance followed him out. Her voice was strained. "Admiral, our jamming is actually helping them. They are using our own high-energy pulses to triangulate their distance from our hull. We are providing them with a perfect yardstick." The admiral did not respond immediately. He watched the drone. The machine seemed to be waiting for something. It was not an attack. It was a demonstration of absolute technological parity. 4:10 in the afternoon. The heartbeat pulse returned to the radio. It was louder now, faster. The sound filled every corner of the ship. It was no longer a rhythm. It was a countdown. The tactical action officer shouted from the CIC. "Admiral, the ring is collapsing. They are moving into the inner defense zone. All targets are closing at once." The black crosses surged forward. The 1,000-meter ring was gone. The cage was tightening. The drones were now only 500 meters from the hull. They were close enough that a single mistake by any pilot or any machine would cause a collision. The admiral looked at the phalanx gun system. The barrels were spinning. The computer was screaming for permission to fire. "Steady," the admiral said. His voice was a whisper against the wind. The peak of the crisis had arrived. 4:11 in the afternoon. The Strait of Hormuz. The drones were now 500 meters from the hull. They were moving at 60 knots. The formation was no longer a ring. It was a crushing wall of carbon fiber. Every defensive sensor on the USS Abraham Lincoln was screaming. The sound of the alarms inside the Combat Information Center was a continuous, piercing howl. The tactical action officer did not look up from his screen. Admiral, 500 meters. They have entered the kinetic engagement zone. I have a fire control lock on all 48 targets. Admiral Thorne felt the vibration of the ship in his boots. The carrier was a Titan, but even a Titan could be blinded by 1,000 stings. He looked at the main display. Each drone was now assigned to a specific defensive station on the carrier. They were not aiming for the hull. They were aiming for the eyes of the ship. They were aiming for the radar arrays. They were aiming for the bridge. 4:12 in the afternoon. The pilot of the lead F-18 looked through his canopy. A drone was hovering 20 feet above his cockpit glass. It was so close, he could see the reflection of his own helmet in the drone's camera lens. The pilot gripped the stick. His heart hammered against his ribs. The pilot spoke into his mask. Control. Raven 1-1. I am being boxed in. The drone is blocking my launch path. The controller responded from the tower. Raven 1-1. Hold position. Do not engage. Repeat. Do not engage. Control. He is looking right at me, the pilot said. He is painting my canopy with a laser. My systems are failing. 4:13 in the afternoon. Inside the Iranian bunker, the silence was absolute. Commander Abbas watched the synchronized feed from 48 cameras. The resolution was perfect. He could see the individual sailors on the American deck. He could see the sweat on their faces. He could see the barrels of the phalanx guns tracking his machines. The lead scientist whispered, "The American admiral is holding. He is not fired." Abbas did not blink. He is waiting for the logic to break. He thinks there is a human error coming. He does not realize there are no humans left in this loop. The scientist adjusted a slider on the glass table. Phase 3. The constriction. 4:14 in the afternoon. Back on the Lincoln, the drone ring collapsed again. They were now at 300 meters. 200. The high-pitched whine of the electric motors was now a physical force. It rattled the teeth of the lookouts on the signal bridge. The air around the carrier felt like it was about to ignite. Captain Vance stood at the edge of the bridge. Her hand was hovering over the weapon release authorization. Admiral, they are at 200 meters. If we do not fire now, we will not have time to intercept a coordinated strike. They are inside our minimum reaction window. The Admiral did not move. He was a statue in a storm of noise. "Admiral!" Vance shouted over the whine of the drones. "Give the order!" The tactical officer's voice broke through the noise. "Sir, one contact is accelerating. It is the lead unit. It is diving straight for the primary radar array." The drone was a black blur. 100 meters. 50. The phalanx gun began to fire. A stream of tracer rounds cut through the air. The sound was like a giant zipper being torn open. The shells missed. The drone was too fast. It was maneuvering in a jagged, non-linear path that broke the computer's tracking logic. The drone reached the edge of the radar tower. Every man on the bridge flinched. They waited for the explosion. They waited for the fire. They waited for the world to end. 4:15 in the afternoon. 4:16 in the afternoon. The Strait of Hormuz. The drone did not strike the radar tower. At the very last second, the Black Cross flared its wings. It pulled into a vertical climb that strained its carbon fiber frame. The turbulence from its electric rotors was so intense it rattled the thick glass of the primary bridge windows. A single, small object fell away from the drone's belly. It was a black cylinder, no larger than a soda can. It plummeted toward the sea and hit the water with a clean, white plume of spray. The silence that followed was heavy. Inside the Combat Information Center, every technician was frozen at their station. They waited for the explosion. They waited for the secondary swarm to follow the lead. It did not happen. The sonar operator broke the silence. His voice was trembling. "Admiral, contact in the water. We have a buoy active. It is broadcasting on a low-frequency acoustic band." Admiral Thorne stepped back from the window. "Is it an explosive?" The operator shook his head. "Negative, sir. It is a passive sonar recorder, but it is not just listening. It is playing something back. Bridge. I am putting it on the main speakers now." The sound that filled the bridge was deep and rhythmic. It was a low-frequency thrumming. It was the sound of 2 nuclear-powered turbines and 4 massive brass propellers churning through the water. It was the acoustic signature of the USS Abraham Lincoln. Captain Vance looked at the admiral. Her face was pale. "That is us. They recorded our signature from 300 meters away. They have our exact acoustic fingerprint." The admiral understood the message immediately. This was not a suicide run. It was a demonstration of absolute transparency. In modern naval warfare, the acoustic signature is the most guarded secret of any vessel. If an enemy has it, they can find the ship anywhere in the world. They can track it through the noise of a storm or the clutter of a busy shipping lane. 300 miles away, inside the Iranian bunker, the mood had shifted. The scientists were no longer adjusting dials. They were watching the data stream. Commander Abbas looked at the glowing table. The green circle on the map was expanding. The lead scientist spoke. "The primary unit has returned to its station. The acoustic handshake is complete. The Americans now know that we have their fingerprint. The swarm has achieved its secondary objective." Abbas did not smile. "And the Americans? What is their reaction?" "They have ceased fire," the scientist replied. "Their close-in weapon system has returned to the standby position. They are processing the event." Abbas looked at the clock. "They are deciding whether to treat this as an act of war or a technical accident. We have given them a way out. Now we see if they are wise enough to take it." Back on the Lincoln, the 48 drones had returned to their perfect ring at 1,000 meters. They were static again. They were silent. The high-pitched whine had faded into the background noise of the ocean wind. The red targeting lasers had vanished. Admiral Thorne looked at the black crosses on the horizon. His jaw was tight. He knew he had just witnessed a revolution in naval power. A swarm of drones that cost less than a single American fighter jet had just held a nuclear carrier hostage. They had mapped its soul and played it back for the world to hear. The admiral turned to the communications officer. "Get me a secure line to the Pentagon. Use the flash override. I need to speak with the Chief of Naval Operations. Tell him the rules of engagement in the strait just changed. Tell him the ring is not a cage, it is a mirror." Captain Vance looked at the tactical screen. The ring was holding, but something else was appearing on the long-range radar. A second group of signatures was rising from the coast of Iran. They were much larger, and they were moving much faster. "Admiral," Vance said, "we have company. The second wave is inbound, and these are not drones." The crisis was not over. It was entering Phase 2. 4:20 in the afternoon. The Strait of Hormuz. The tactical display on the USS Abraham Lincoln was now cluttered with a new tier of threats. To the north, 2 fast-moving signatures had crossed the coastal line of Iran. They were moving at Mach 1.2. The Combat Information Center identified them as Su-30 flanker fighters. They were not drones. These were manned aircraft, and they were armed with long-range anti-ship missiles. Admiral Thorne watched the icons close the distance. They are using the swarm as a shield. They know we cannot fire at the jets without shooting through the ring of drones first. If we destroy a drone to get a clear shot at the flankers, we are the aggressors. Captain Vance looked at the electronic warfare console. "Sir, the drones are now acting as relay nodes for the incoming fighters. They are passing our exact coordinates to the Su-30s. The flankers do not even have to turn on their own radars. They are flying silent. We are being targeted by a ghost." The confusion on the bridge was palpable. The pivot from a flying expects-it drone harassment to a coordinated airstrike was happening in seconds. The American crew had been prepared for a technical standoff. Now, they were facing a conventional kinetic threat that was being guided by an unconventional autonomous net. 4:35 in the afternoon. Inside the Iranian bunker, the atmosphere was thick with technical data. Commander Abbas was no longer looking at the carrier. He was looking at the telemetry from the two Su-30 fighters. The technician reported, "The pilots have the data link from the swarm. They have a fire control solution on the American carrier. They are waiting for the command to lock." Abbas held up a hand. "Do not lock. If they hear the spike of a targeting radar, they will fire. We have already shown them we have their acoustic signature. Now, we show them we have their throat in our hands. Maintain the approach, but do not cross the 12-mile limit." Abbas was playing a game of chicken at 1,000 miles per hour. He knew the Americans were in contact with their central command. He knew that right now, a phone was ringing in a secure room in Washington, 4:45 in the afternoon. The secure satellite link on the Lincoln chirped. It was a direct line from the National Military Command Center at the Pentagon. Admiral Thorne took the handset. The voice on the other end was gravelly, authoritative. "Admiral, this is the chairman. We are on a back channel with Tehran. They claim this is a pre-scheduled exercise of their integrated coastal defense system. They say the drones are not under their direct control, but the fighters are. They have promised to turn the flankers away if we maintain our current course and speed without activating our fire control systems." Thorne looked at the drone still hovering 300 meters from his bridge. "Sir, they have our acoustic signature. They have 48 armed units surrounding my ship. They are painting us with lasers. Calling this an exercise is a lie." "We know it is a lie, Marcus," the chairman replied, "but it is a lie that prevents a war. Hold your fire. I repeat, do not engage unless you are struck. We are de-escalating from here." Thorne handed the handset back. He looked at Captain Vance. "We are to stand down. We are to let them humiliate us in international waters." Vance began to respond, but a new alarm cut her off. It was coming from the sonar station. The operator's voice was urgent. "Admiral, new contacts. Multiple launches from the Iranian coast. These are not aircraft. They are moving on the surface." Thorne turned to the screen. A second swarm had been detected. It was not heading for the Lincoln. It was splitting into two groups. Each group was heading directly for the escort destroyers, the USS Halsey and the USS Sampson. The net was not just tightening, it was multiplying. 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The Strait of Hormuz. The surface of the water was no longer calm. To the north of the carrier strike group, two distinct clusters of white foam were moving south at 50 knots. These were unmanned surface vessels. They were low profile, sleek, and nearly invisible to standard surface search radar. They were designed to strike the vulnerable steering gear and propeller shafts of large warships. On the bridge of the destroyer USS Halsey, the captain gripped the arms of his chair. He watched the digital representation of the surface swarm on his console. 24 contacts were closing on his position. Another 24 were heading for the USS Sampson. The captain spoke into his headset. "Combat, bridge. Target the lead surface contacts with the 5-inch gun. Prepare the Bushmaster cannons for close-in defense. If they cross the 500-meter line, take them out." The tactical officer's voice came back through the wire. "Captain, the airborne swarm is still above us. If we elevate our guns to hit the surface targets, the drones in the air will have a clear path to our sensor masts. They are boxing us in." It was a perfect tactical checkmate. If the destroyers defended against the sea, they exposed themselves to the sky. If they focused on the sky, the sea would take their rudders. 5:0 to 8 in the afternoon. Inside the Iranian command bunker, Commander Abbas stood before the glass table. The two Su-30 flankers were now only 20 miles from the American carrier. They were within the optimal launch window for their anti-ship missiles. The surface drones were seconds away from the 500-meter threshold. A red light began to flash on the primary console. It was a secure priority message from the Ministry of Defense in Tehran. The technician looked up. "Commander, the diplomatic channel has reached a conclusion. Washington has agreed to a formal protest through the Swiss embassy. They will not activate their fire control radars. They will continue their transit without further electronic interference. Abbas looked at the screen. He saw the American carrier, a billion-dollar machine, surrounded by a ring of carbon fiber that cost less than its fuel for a single day. He had proven the point. Abbas spoke. Execute the withdrawal protocol. All units. Consensus code. Zenith. The technician pressed a single button, 5:10 in the afternoon. On the bridge of the USS Abraham Lincoln, the high-pitched harmonic whine that had filled the air for hours suddenly changed. It became a long, sustained tone that resonated through the hull. It lasted for exactly 10 seconds. Admiral Thorne watched the drone that had been hovering 300 meters from his window. The Black Cross suddenly tilted its nose up toward the sky. Its electric motors screamed with a new, frantic energy. The drone did not fly away. It climbed. The Admiral stepped onto the bridge wing. He looked up. All 48 drones were executing a synchronized vertical climb. They moved with a speed that defied standard flight physics. Within seconds, they were at 5,000 feet, 10,000, 30,000. They became tiny black dots against the fading light of the afternoon sun. Then, they vanished into the upper atmosphere. To the north, the two Su-30 fighters banked hard. Their afterburners ignited, leaving two jagged orange scars against the blue sky. They were no longer closing. They were retreating toward the Iranian mainland at Mach 1.5. On the water, the 48 surface drones performed a simultaneous turn. They did not slow down. They carved a massive, white arc in the sea and headed back toward the coast. 5:15 in the afternoon. The radar screens on the Lincoln were suddenly clear. The glowing green icons that had crowded the display for hours had blinked out. The only thing remaining was the steady, rhythmic sweep of the primary search radar. The ocean was empty. The sky was silent. The silence on the bridge was absolute. It was a heavy, ringing silence that followed the departure of a great weight. Captain Vance lowered her binoculars. Her hands were steady, but her face was pale. Admiral, the ring is gone. All contacts have withdrawn. They are clearing the area at high speed. The Admiral did not look at her. He was still looking at the empty patch of sky where the drones had been. Cancel general quarters. Secure the ship. Resume our previous course and speed. We are continuing the transit. The captain nodded. Sir, what do we put in the official log? Admiral Thorne turned away from the window. Tell the truth, Captain. Tell them we were watched. Tell them we were measured. Tell them we were measured. And tell them that from now on, the ocean is a very small place. The carrier continued its transit. To an outsider, it looked as if nothing had happened. But every man and woman on that ship knew that the world had changed in the span of 3 hours. The era of the carrier strike group had met its successor. 3 days later, Northern Virginia. The air inside the secure briefing room at the Office of Naval Intelligence was cold. On the wall-sized digital display, the events in the Strait of Hormuz were being played back at 10 times their original speed. From this height, the USS Abraham Lincoln looked like a silver needle. The 48 drones looked like a halo of black dust. The movement was so fluid and so perfectly synchronized that it appeared biological. It did not look like math. It looked like an instinct. A senior analyst stood at the podium. He pointed a laser at the screen. We have finished the initial data scrub. What we saw was not a remote-controlled operation. There was no master signal. There was no single point of failure. Every drone was an independent node in a decentralized brain. We call it swarm intelligence. It is the first time we have seen it deployed. At this scale, against a high-value target. In the front row, Admiral Thorne sat with his arms crossed. He had traded his flight suit for a dress uniform. He looked at the frozen image of the black ring. The acoustic handshake. What is the status of that file? The analyst looked down at his notes. The Iranians have not leaked the recording to the public. Not yet. But they have it. They have the unique frequency of the Lincoln's propulsion system. They have mapped the resonance of the hull. They have turned a 100,000-ton sovereign vessel into a known acoustic variable. In any future engagement, they do not need to find us. They can simply listen for us. 9:15 in the morning. The briefing continued into the strategic implications. The numbers on the screen were stark. The total cost of the Iranian drone swarm was estimated at less than $5 million. The cost of the USS Abraham Lincoln strike group was over $20 billion. It was a mathematical catastrophe. For the price of a single carrier, an adversary could build 4,000 swarms. They could saturate every ocean on the planet with silent, waiting circles. The analyst tapped the screen. The pivot point was the restraint. Our systems were ready to fire. Their systems were ready to strike. But the algorithm did not glitch. And the admiral did not blink. If a single drone had suffered a mechanical failure and drifted 10 meters closer, we would be in a general state of war across the entire Middle East right now. Admiral Thorne stood up. He walked to the front of the room and looked at the map of the strait. "It was not a glitch," he said. His voice was quiet. It was a demonstration of absolute control. They wanted us to see that they could touch us whenever they chose. They wanted us to know that our defenses are built for a type of war that no longer exists. We are built to fight missiles and jets. We are not built to fight a cloud. The room was silent. The officers and analysts looked at the image of the carrier. It looked lonely in the center of that black ring. It looked like a relic of a different century. 10:30 in the morning. A final report was handed to the Secretary of the Navy. It was classified as top secret. It did not recommend a massive increase in missile production. It did not call for more carriers. It called for a fundamental reassessment of how a superpower projects its will. The report concluded with a single, handwritten note from Admiral Thorne. He wrote it while watching the sun set over the Potomac River. Modern warfare is no longer a contest of strength. It is a contest of systems. The era of the carrier as an untouchable fortress is over. We have entered the age of the ghost. The next war will not be won by the side with the biggest guns. It will be won by the side that can hold the circle without ever pulling the trigger. The morning sun hit the glass of the Pentagon. Far away, in the deep waters of the Arabian Sea, the USS Abraham Lincoln continued its mission. It was a titan of the ocean. It was a marvel of engineering. But beneath the waves and above the clouds, the silent watchers were already waiting for the next transit. The ring had been broken, but the memory of the circle remained.